congratulate Raymond on the 3 merit awards. Harry did have a photograph of Raymond.
It's
holding,
up.
There we go.
This is Raymond holding the display board that our team of judges inspected and awarded him 3 merit awards. And so congratulations, Raymond. Now, I'd like to say one quick word about the civil certificate. If you are considering working toward the civil AP certificate, you should know that the requirements were changed in 2019. No longer are scratch-built track pieces judged by points on 5 different categories. They are now judged on just 3 categories on a pass-fail basis. The 3 categories are craftsmanship, conformity, and scratch-built. You still must demonstrate operational ability to run an engine back and forth through the track. And for conformity, the pieces of track must conform to the NMRA standards, and we will use an NMRA track gauge and run it through the track, checking all of the necessary points of the pieces of the track. So it's a lot easier now to earn the merit awards on scratch-built track. So if that's been holding you up in the past, think about working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, Walt, you have a special award as well. Walt?
Walt's presenting. Walt's not speaking.
But Walt is muted.
Walt evaporated, but he's sharing.
I think Walt is frozen.
He's in.
There we go.
Ah, there he is. Okay.
Unmute Walt, please. Sorry.
Okay. So Craig Knox is here tonight, and Craig Knox is one of our members. He's kind of behind the scenes person. You used to see him in the meetings, and he would pop inside the meeting with some cool videos at different layouts or different events. But Craig Knox was one of the key players, along with the team of Mike's, with the pilgrimage this year. And we wanted to recognize a certificate of recognition for Craig Knox and his outstanding work. And I really want to say it's not just the videography and the professionalism. He hustled. He had to cover a lot of miles. He went to all the people's houses, did the videos, sometimes had to go back twice and do them. That's a lot of miles across the metro area to a lot of layouts. And we want to recognize him for his hard work and his devotion. That beautiful video job he did on a lot of the layouts. It's just fantastic. So special thanks to Craig tonight, and thank you for your hard work. And it definitely shows. I think Mike said there's something about almost 40,000 people have probably viewed the videos now. So it's pretty awesome. And, there's a few other videographers in there, but Craig definitely did most of the videos. So fantastic job. So thank you very much, Craig.
Yeah, if I could speak in and just add something to that, Walt, this is Mike. Yeah, because we looked through everything. I think we decided that Craig had something to do, either filming or editing or both. Over half of the videos, of the 47 videos we produced, Craig had some involvement with those. So we could not have done our pilgrimage without him. I just wanted to add that. And thank you so much, Craig, from me and the whole committee and the rest of the division.
Definitely thank you very much, Craig. Appreciate it. I'm glad you were able to attend tonight, Craig.
Okay, Mike, did you want to continue talking about the pilgrimage? The wrap up on it?
Certainly, yeah. The main thing I wanted to announce tonight, and normally, of course, we were having a meeting, I'd present certificates to our first-time exhibitors. as it is. Those are in the mail, but I want to name them personally. We had 3 folks who had never been on the pilgrimage before, and they're receiving a nice certificate about that. That's Tom Klomoski, who I believe is on tonight, Robert Meyer, and Alan Sale, all first-timers, and we certainly thank them for their support. You should be receiving a certificate in the mail very shortly, and we hope you'll display that proudly in your train room.
And Craig, I'll get your thing to you. I'll be mailing it to you along with some other plaques that we have.
Okay.
I'll take a moment just to give some numbers, since she mentioned some of the stats here. We had, just through the end of the year, we had 47 videos we put on the website. We had almost 38,000 views. That's individual recorded of somebody went to the video to start watching it. And that's just the videos themselves of the layouts. That averaged about 803 views per video. You know, the total watch time that YouTube recorded was over 4,300 hours just through the end of the year of 2020. We had 10% of our views were beyond North America, so outside of the US and Canada. We had about 4,630 international views in 12 different countries. So that was pretty amazing reach. And just again, on my part, thank you to my committee, all the people that worked so hard on putting it together. And certainly thanks to those of you who had a layout on tour. We thank you for your support.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Okay, Perry, could you get up Nikhil's book, please?
Yep, I certainly can. Let me go pull that up.
Okay. I'll tell you a little something about Nikhil. He is was one of our members. He's been very, very busy at school these days, but he emailed me the other day and told me that he's a published author now. And the name of his book is The Chronicles of a Teenage Railroad Enthusiast. He starts college in the fall. I think that's a super exciting thing for him. The book is for sale on Amazon. If you need any information about that or want to know how to get it, I can certainly give you the link to it. But that's pretty exciting to have one of our own being an author is so young. So, and especially with the subject matter that he wrote on. I think that's pretty neat too. So,
Sally, why don't you send the link to everybody, if you would?
okay. Okay. I'm right.
Sally,
Yes, sir.
let me give me the info too, and I'll put it in that e-blast that we were talking about at the board meeting.
Okay, Doug, I will do that.
Thank you.
That's pretty exciting, and I'm sure you all remember him. Of course, we haven't seen him for a year or so because of the COVID thing, but it's pretty neat that he reached out and wanted us to know. So, okay, and the other thing I talked to Fred Coleman, who is doing part of the Asheville Train Show, and as far as he knows, as of this past Saturday, it's still a go. So if you've got the itch to go to a train show, double check and make sure it's still open. But it's in Asheville, and it's February 26th and 27th. So he asked if I would announce that to you tonight. So, okay. Dave Berman, welcome tonight again. You're getting to be a usual person with us. Dave is going to be sharing a Stephen Priest video tonight, which is very exciting. I tried to get Stephen in person, but he does not do Tuesday nights. He has a commitment. So he offered us to do a recorded clinic. So are you about ready to do that, Dave?
I think I'm ready. I'm going to see how I'm going to have to share this, so hold on.
Okay.
And I have set you as the presenter.
And there's Google Chrome.
Okay.
So what I'm going to show you, this is, some of you may know I'm involved with an operating group here in the La Crosse, Wisconsin area. And we meet every Thursday night. And we've had a variety of people in speaking, and we're fortunate that Steve Priest crosses our paths quite often as we share some operating weekends with Kansas City. They come up here, we go there. And I mentioned that I would like to get him to talk. And the first week he came, he gave us basically a tour of his layout. But the second week he did a presentation called Little Things, Big Differences. And I know Perry is using pieces of it because I've seen some evidence of that. But we thought we might share this one with you because it's a pretty good, it has a lot of very, 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 very good little tips in it. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started. This may buffer occasionally. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to behave. We'll find out.
Thank you.
So again, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Quite a few of you have been down and run on the railroad, which of course is gone now. So number one, a good place to work. And as a model railroader or model railroaders, it's key to have a good place to work. Most of your railroad is going to be built on a, once you get past the benchwork stage, will be built at a workbench. And so it's great for organization, being able to find things, material storage, spending time with friends. When I build shops, I always have multiple locations so you can sit down with other people and do things socially. Of course, the centralized location, that means, you know, you get to it easily. It's not up in your attic or something when your railroad's in the basement, you know. But if that's the only place you have space for, then, you know, that's it. And then good lighting, obviously. As I get older, I don't know if you guys have found out, but my eyes, I need a lot of light to model well. That wasn't the case just a few years ago, but my eyes have to have a lot more light. And then I mentioned material storage, being able to separate all your materials out by type, by need, by genre, basically. So if you are doing some scenery, you know right where all your scenery material is. If you're doing structures, you know where your structures are at. That just helps you and walk away. And by having these things organized, when you do get the itch, you can go down and get right to it. So that's kind of a really nice thing to be able to do. It takes time to get to this and a little bit of investment, but it is definitely worth having a good shop that's organized. In this era, part of your shop really needs to be some form of a digital workstation. A lot of what we do now is computer-based, or it's also DCC-based or CMRI-based. And so part of the shop that we built had one workstation, I will call it, where it was all set up around electronics and computers and decoder programming and things like that. And a lot of the guys would come over, as you can see here with Brett Overholzer and Keith Robinson, you know, they'd come over regularly and their projects would be electronics, you know. Also, there's some other people here like John DePaul and Bill Carr that spent quite a bit of time in this shop putting things together too a couple of years ago. So we talked about this earlier, paint booth. One of the things when I was commercially purchasing booths or even building them was they were always really too small for large buildings, like large granular complexes and things like that. So I ended up building a very large booth with a large blower motor off of a Gen Air grill. If you've ever seen the Gen Air kitchen grill that really pull that air. This actually has an 8-inch duct that goes out through the wall to outside, and it'll really move the air. So it's really nice to paint in that. It also has a turntable built into it, good lighting, and in this particular booth, I went ahead and used Formica. I lined it with Formica so I can go in there with my methylene chloride periodically and just wipe it down, and it looks brand new. Because if you guys know, paint booths tend to get a little ugly with the overspray and the dust and everything. So I wanted to make it so it clean easily. So the other thing I did with the booth is I put a timer, which you can see down there lower right, and then switches for both the compressor and the lighting. So I can turn my compressor off, I can turn the lighting off, but the fan itself is on a timer. So you crank it over, let it go, and when you're done painting, you can walk away and not forget your fan motor on all day long. So it'll actually time off, and I think the timer goes up. 50 minutes. We're doing all that. So, and that works well. And then, of course, air dryers and some things like that, you know, to keep the water out of your paint. Anybody that paints knows how nasty it is to get. Need to know before I go to Leavenworth. So, okay, hidden track protection. I don't have a lot of hidden track, no helix or anything like that in the railroad, but I did have some trackage that was kind of cantilevered, and I wanted to protect that. So what we ended up doing is we ended up getting some strip Masonite and strip Lexan, which I cut on the table saw, and then we just stapled it to either side. So basically what happens is it acts as a guide to protect the track work so things don't end up on the floor. It's nice to have the clear Lexan because you can see if things are derailed. You can also reach in there with your fingers to put things back on track, and you have that visual representation. So instead of just using a solid strip of Masonite, which you can use, obviously, the clear was really nice because you could see if you had issues back there. And of course, if you know about model railroading, your trains will always find a place to derail in the absolute worst area they can. That's just one of the laws of model railroading. And so I tried to mitigate that by making things somewhat visible. Intermodal yard design. One of the really neat things about working with people, groups of people, is the fact that you have people within your group, and you guys know this, that have strengths and abilities. And one of the people that I've been fortunate enough to work with is Eric Goodman, who has been the regional director of hub operations for the BNSF. And I, being a Santa Fe modeler, have a lot of intermodal, a lot of piggyback stuff. And so I brought Eric in and said, hey, let's talk about actual design and designing a facility around a prototypical intermodal facility. And so Eric came over and we spent a couple afternoons working on things and laying things out. And then we got together as a group during one of the work sessions, laid the track, and then laid all the large sheets of plastic in there. And that worked out really well. We used, I can't think of Sintra for the piggyback, and then we decaled it and everything after that, and you'll see some of that. You guys probably know about Dynaflex 230. I imagine a bunch of you lay your track with it at this point, which a lot of people do anymore. It works beautiful. It also works really good for holding Sintra down. So we use that to hold the Sintra. You see the rail in there, that'll all be ballasted between the Sintra, and then the Sintra was painted. So if you look at how it's black at this point, if you look at some of the photos coming up, you'll see how we weathered it, how we modified it to look more like pavement and used weathered pavement as well. This was such a large project, we had to have a whole bunch of people in there to weight things down and to make a go of it. So that's the part of the group in there laying stuff. And then of course we hold it down with bricks and with thumbtacks to let it dry. Here you see it in the phase, the lower picture is the phase where we ballasted in there now, and we've done the first round of decal striping. I tell you what, if you want to have a really fun afternoon, sit down there and do a bunch of decal striping like that in a straight line and do 6 rows of it. Yeah, that was not a very fun afternoon, but it was something that made a huge difference in the way things. The upper 2 pictures, I want to tell you guys, and I don't know if any of you have found a better method, but you'll notice the curved trackage up there with the curved Sintra. The best way I found to do that is actually to use tape. If you look in the left photograph, you'll see that blue tape that's all over there. What you do is you actually just go in and you just basically mask off where you want the pavement. So you go in there, put all the tape down, and then when you're done, you actually pull that tape off, take it, stick it on the piece of Sintra, and use it as a template to cut the Sintra out. And it's, of course, will be an exact fit because obviously you made it fit exactly in the track work. And you'll notice like the little teeny narrow sliver in the middle there between the 2 pieces of track. This works beautifully. And I do this with all my roads, with all my city streets, anywhere I have a structure that I want to make a foundation for, just use tape as a template. You can cut it the exact size and shape with an X-Acto. You can fit it perfectly, peel the whole thing up, stick it on to the piece of Sintra or whatever you're cutting, and it'll give you the exact shape of that object. So that's I don't know what you guys' method are, but that works really, really well. Cut complex shapes like streets and station platforms and things like that. In the upper right-hand photograph there, that's one of the 3D printed brought straddle loaders that Mike Brusca did. I think there's over 300 parts in that kit, is there not, Mike?
326.
326. That's an amazing kit. And you'll see a couple of them on the layout there. You'll also, in the upper left photo, you can see after the weathering of the concrete, you'll see the concrete's patched. It's different colors, and it's taken on a realistic approach there. You also see Ron Kofer there. He's smiling in that picture. You can't tell, but he's actually smiling. Here again is a picture of some of the pavement. You can tell how the pavement was weathered there. A variety of different chalks and different airbrush effects, and then some dark black marker to come in and basically do the repairs. That type of thing takes about an afternoon to do, but it's really, really worth it in a facility like this because it makes that pavement really believable. When you walk in and you look at that distress on the pavement, and it looks good. And then you'll notice there was some more decaling done there, like the little stop signs painted, quote unquote, painted onto the pavement where the crossings are. So, all right. Next thing I want to talk to you about is little dudes. When I started this railroad, we had kids. In fact, there's Mike B there, right there. I see him. And hi, Mike, how are you? And Jacob's there too. So we the boys were little boys when we started. And this is my son Joel and Cody Cameron there. And a lot of people kind of will brush kids off, young kids off, when it comes to working on their railroads. And I'll tell you what, kids, if you tell them what to do and you give them a challenge, are excellent at doing what they do. They've got great eyesight, which a lot of us don't. They're flexible. They can, I tell you what, they're natural born wire pullers, man. You give them a piece of wire and say, I need this wire to go clear down to that other end. And man, they love doing it. It's a challenge for them. And it's also, they're obviously going to be the next generation of modelers. And they learn an awful lot. Both of these boys and Jacob came a long way from their basic skills over the 4 or 5 year period. And there's Cody in the right-hand picture there. These guys are now young men. And there's Jacob and Mike up in the upper left-hand photograph there, doing a lot of senior work. But the boys all picked up really well, did a fantastic job, and are really, really doing well. Joel worked a lot with Bill Carr in the left-hand photograph. That is the inside of the CPC panel. And me and John DePaul, Bill Carr, and Keith Robinson wired all the panels and left those pigtails on them. Joel and Bill Carr then completed all that over the phone. They would literally work on the phone, and that whole CPC panel was wired by Joel remotely, working with Bill, and then programmed with Bill, and it was an amazing event to watch take place. And then, of course, there's Cody down the lower right-hand picture again, and then Jacob Dittmer in the upper right. Jacob, I have to give him credit. He was a trooper. We gave him probably 25,000 wire feeders to strip, wrap, and tin. And he is a professional solderer now. He can probably out-solder anybody because he did more wire tinning than you can believe. So, girlfriends love model trains as well. Joel would always bring the gals over. This is Casey, one of his squeezes, who they're no longer together, but they spent several evenings working and making trees, had a blast doing that. And Casey was cool. She had a good time, and we had a lot of fun. And I kind of miss her because she was always bubbly and she was a blast, actually. But anyway, so, they had pseudo dates at our place, doing things like making trees and doing scenery, which was really cool. Joel is now in the Air Force. That's him up there on the F-16 wing under Dude there. And it's amazing because the guys in his unit, he's in Spangler in Germany now, maintaining F-16s, and they call him Tony Stark. That's his nickname because of his model raring prowess. And that's the lower picture there where it says A1C Priest is Tony Stark. They put that all over the place because Joel can fix about anything electronics. And it's really cool to see that. And that harkens back purely to model rarity, guys. He never went to school or anything before he was in the Air Force. Bill Carr worked with him. Mike Porter worked with him. I worked with him. And it's a great build of character for young men to get involved in rarity. So if you guys have grandchildren neighbors, anything like that, get them involved. It is a fantastic thing to do. Get them away from that screen, that iPad or whatever. Get them into model railroading where they're actually doing something with their hands. The old joke was, electronics will teach you to use your thumbs. I'm going to teach you to use your other 8 digits as well. And Mike's not logged on tonight, but Mike has been a superhero with these boys. Mike is wonderful. He will get together with the boys and work and teach them how to wire. Mike is a journeyman electrician, and Mike ran a lot of people through electrical courses at my house, showing them how to basically do electronics. And I don't know about you guys, but most young men, including me and everybody else, will have to own a house at some time, a home. And if you can do a lot of these repairs and things on your own, you're going to be much better off. So Mike Porter is my superhero because of the time he took to work with the young guys. All right, let's talk about Masonite joints. Anybody that worked on my layout, which there are several of you logged on here, will know we have a kind of a very different way of doing our backdrops and our fascia. I wanted this to be a quick process because I'm always in a hurry. I didn't want any holes to patch. I didn't want to patch any sheetrock screws. I wanted joints that absolutely will not crack, picker or chip, and then something that paints well. So in messing with a lot of Masonite, I eventually came around. I messed with Durham, putty, all kind of stuff, and eventually came around to using Bondo, which is an automotive, automotive, and Bondo actually makes they call it a multi-purpose putty. It's a little different than what you use in your automobile. It doesn't have the fiberglass base to it, but it works very well. And I'll tell you what, when you put that Bondo on Masonite, you cannot chip it off. If you go start pulling on the Bondo, you literally pull a layer of the Masonite off. It sticks so well, it is unbelievable. And it's really low dust, unlike sheetrock, where when you dust it, gets all up in the air. Bondo's thick and heavy. It literally just kind of falls onto the ground when you sand it. The only thing is it does have an aroma to it, although the all-purpose putty is a lot better than the automotive putty. So we're going to talk about this a little bit in the process. Again, the goal is a very nice, smooth, flawless fascia and sky. And I would urge all of you to spend time on your fascia and on your skies, because that is what frames and presents your model railroad. And the more time you spend on that, the more you perfect it, the more beautiful your railroad's going to be. Because again, it's a frame. It's a situation where you're framing things. So when we did our backdrop, we would do it in lengths up to about 20 feet. And we used super glue, basically ACC, an accelerator, to make a joint. And the joint was made out of 2 pieces and then a plate. So we would glue one side of the plate to one side of it, and then we'd come back with the ACC on the other side of it and leave about an 1/8 of an inch gap between the two for the Bondo. Put that together, and then we'd accelerate that with ACC. That would give us, like I said, anywhere from an 8-foot piece up to about 18 feet. We had times when we had long runs of backdrop where it would take us, we'd have to have 5 or 6 different guys to hold and put that into place. And it works beautifully. Here you'll see a joint up above there being made. And you'll notice that big old long strip. If you look off to the left, it goes clear down and around the corner, and then you'll see the plate there. The other thing I hate doing is I hate patching holes. I hate sheetrock holes. I hate sheetrock screw holes, rather. And I hate all kinds of nail holders. So what we would do is we would use a little bit of liquid nail on the 2x4. And then we would use a nail gun. And we would put a nail brad in at the very top and at the very bottom, and that was it. Just enough to tack it in place and hold it, rather than putting a sheetrock screw every 6 or 8 inches and then you have to go back and deal with all those. So in the end, we had very little surface damage to the Masonite that we had to go back and deal with. We would then go back, add the Bondo to it, and then we would sand it. And I bought a DeWalt vacuum sander, so I would basically have this hooked up to a shop vac, and literally the fallout from this and the dust was almost non-existent. I mean, literally, we had areas of the railroad, like the lower picture there. You'll notice the railroad is partially scenic there where we're doing Bondo work. And using that vacuum sander worked beautifully to do the sanding. The other thing is I like very serpentine railroads, and you'll notice in that upper left-hand photograph, you see how serpentine the backdrop is. The nice thing about that is it helps you mitigate expansion and contraction. If you have a lot of really straight runs, you're going to have issues with those straight runs wanting to expand and contract on you over periods of time. So I intentionally put curvature into my backdrops so that naturally mitigates that. When things expand, you just get a little more curvature. When they contract, that takes the curvature out of it. And that is not an accidental design. That's very intentional doing that because of the properties of the materials on your railroad. After you go back and paint it, we graduate the skies. We paint kind of white at the bottom and go kind of up toward blue. And then I do a lot of cloud work on that. Again, you'll see the very serpentine backdrops, how that kind of curves around everything. And works beautifully, works well. Mike Dittmer is kind of doing this at his house right now. Same type of thing, doing the backdrop work. And yeah, so.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
You had some really tight curves in your Masonite.
I did.
How did you get a tight curve like that? I know, but.
Well, we had some, like Lynn said, we had some pretty tight areas, and fantastic, the cleaner. Fantastic. If you spray it on Masonite and you actually soak the Masonite, it turns it into rubber. I mean, literally, it makes it really, really soft. You can bend curves clear down to 4 inches in Masonite if you soak it with Fantastic, the cleaner. I don't know what chemical it is in the Fantastic that turns the, I mean, it's really interesting. It actually turns the Masonite into like leather, and then when it evaporates out of it, it gets hard again. Thank you for reminding me of that, Lynn. I appreciate that. So, yeah, it works really well, and it allows you to bend that without the Masonite snapping. So,
Well, I remember that because my mouth fell open when you bent that thing that tight. I couldn't believe you didn't snap it.
and what's funny about that is I don't remember where I picked that trick up. I know I didn't invent it myself. I know that. I got it from somebody. It might have been one of the guys in Denver. I can't remember where I learned that, but I read it someplace. They were talking about bending Masonite and how he soaked it. Dave Campsnyder, it might have been, and how they soaked it and absolutely soaked the daylights out of it to bend it. So, and these are a few more pictures that you can see what I will use the word blessing, what a blessing, a nice fascia and a nice sky is to your layout. This is the first layout. I built 16 railroads in my life, and this is the first railroad that I really took the time to do the backdrop work and the skies and the scenery painting to the level I did. And I really, really am glad I did, because it took a few more extra weeks going in there and learning to paint, because I am not an artist by any means. I kind of have a club as a left hand and a club on my left as a right hand, but over time you kind of figure out how to mix the stuff. And Tom Dynaflex has a really good book that he's produced through Kalmbach on painting backdrops. And if you guys are interested in this, pick that book up. He walks you through what colors to use, how to mix things, and how to actually do this type of work. And it is a marvelous book, and it's really easy for idiots like me to follow. So I was able to come up with, I would say, mediocre results. I'm no Tom Dynaflex. His artwork is, there it is right there. Yeah, and I used pretty much every trick in that book. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And that's where I got it at. And it makes a huge difference in your skies. And your skies create such a nice depth in your railroad. And I'm a shelf modeler. In other words, there are a lot of spots on my railroad there that were no wider than 6 inches. I was going for length, not width in the railroad. And the skies and backdrop make a huge difference. Okay, so the next thing is oak control panels. Panels on your railroad is something that it's basically your operator's interface with your railroad. And a lot of things, I have a lot of beliefs about that. First of all, I believe that they should be very informative. You should be able to have somebody come to your railroad that has never been to your railroad before, and by looking at that panel, they can get a pretty good idea pretty quickly about what's going on. If you'll notice in that panel, east and west are both marked, as well as the major cities, east and west. The city name is marked on there. The signal locations are shown. And then like weight car servicing, engine servicing, and some things like that are shown as well. Also in there, we have short circuit detectors for the east and west end of the yard. I always divide my yards into 2 yard leads, east and west, so if somebody derails on one end of the yard, they don't shut the whole yard down. If there's somebody on the other yard working, they can go ahead and continue. And that's a pretty successful thing. Incidentally, the panels there I had made at a trophy store. That is actually a laminated styrene plastic product. There is a thick piece of white styrene underneath it, and then a thin piece of black styrene. And you give them a piece of artwork, and they use a laser to burn off the upper black, leaving the white showing through. The nice thing about that is that they're about $15 each to have made, but it's styrene, so it's relatively rugged. You can also clean it. And unlike working with chart pack tape or anything like that, that everything starts peeling off over time or whatever, it works very successfully. And I was very happy we did that. I also did that with all my car card boxes and things. A couple more things about the panel we'll talk about, and that is drink holders, pencil holders, and pick holders. In the upper left photograph, you can see the drink holders, the pencil holders, and the pick holders there. I also use a piece of Formica. You'll see it black there on top, so your wood doesn't get damaged by cups that are sweating. They're dripping and sweating. That also leaves you places for people to put pencils and notepads and anything else, their throttles and things like that. The other thing is because I generally mount electronics in these panels, or we always mounted a fan in there as well. If you look down the lower hand picture where Joe Casper is working, if you look between his 2 hands, you'll notice there's a little white dot there. That's a circulation fan to just pull a little bit of air in. Those fans now are so inexpensive, it's unbelievable. You can use a Fortuner bit to drill a big hole in there. You can also see it in the upper left-hand photo. You can see the fan better there. So basically, you're just circulating a little bit of air through there. Not that things are going to get real hot, but we had a CMRI node in there. If you look at the upper right-hand photograph, you can see that. Down to the middle photograph there with the DeWalt drill, I'm drilling the holes out. You'll notice in my artwork, I left a little guide in my artwork as to where things were to be drilled. So those are all part of the design things. And then down the lower right is one of the little wire pullers, hard at work pulling wire all over there. So a blessing. A child is a blessing and a wire puller. Okay, over the aisle lighting. On all my other railroads, especially the last 2 previous to this one, I always put my lighting over the railroad itself. And one day I woke up and I thought, you're kind of an idiot, Steve. Really, the lighting ought to be over the aisle so it face washes the entire railroad rather than being a down source over the layout itself. That has a couple of advantages. First of all, it uses half the fixtures, because if you have an aisle and you have 2 layout islands on either side, I was putting 2 aisles of lighting down there. By moving all that to the center over the aisle itself where the people walk, that single row of lighting will light both sides of the aisle. I also put lighting in every single location, as you notice. Right now, 2x4 troffers, fluorescent troffers, are almost free because a lot of large corporations or things are putting LED lighting in their office buildings. You can go on to Craigslist or wherever, and you can buy an entire pallet of 2x4 troffers for next to nothing. I mean, I got some of these for as little as $3 or $4 each with the bulbs and ballast in it. Now, I eventually changed the bulbs out to LED bulbs or to LED because of the heat issues. But again, you'll notice how even the lighting is in that photograph. If you look at the backdrop, there's no dark areas on it. It's super even. And that's one of the things I wanted to go for, because if you look at layout lighting, when you go to a variety of people's homes and look, you'll have light and dark spots along that backdrop. And I still have some of that occurs in areas where I was not able to get the 2x4 troffers. It's awful hard to bend those 2x4 fixtures. So there are areas where we had to kind of jigsaw them a little bit. You'll notice here's some areas, where you can see the lighting going down and to the right, and then you can see how even the lighting is, and it does really make it a joy to operate and to build your railroad. I remember when we were priming those walls before we painted the blue, it was so bright in there, you almost had to wear sunglasses because there was so much light in there. Jason Krupper, a good friend of mine who suffers from migraine headaches, actually had to leave a couple times because the lighting was so bright that it was giving him headaches. So, but as soon as you put the scenery in, the blue skies in and things like that, they drink an awful lot of light. They absorb a lot of light. So it did knock it down to a level that I thought was a little better. You can see in the lower right-hand picture kind of the overall washing of the light. And that made it kind of a good joy to work with. So. This may seem like a common sense thing, but in this day of digital cameras and digital cell phones and things like that, if you're building a railroad, you might as well go ahead and just shoot the daylights out of everything, including your walls and things, before you cover them up. Because it doesn't really cost anything but a few pixels. But the nice thing is you're going to have 110 behind walls, you're going to have Cat5 maybe, you're going to have communication stuff, all kinds of things like that. And it's nice to have that photographic record of what's behind that wall prior to sealing it up. If any of you are building a house, either I suggest doing this if you're building a house as well, because it's amazing as soon as you seal that wall up, trying to remember what's actually behind there, as part of the build. So we went ahead and shot a lot of that every place we could, so we had a good record of what was there. Pdc Grain Elevators. If you've got a table saw and a cutoff saw, PVC, building a grain elevator out of PVC is actually easier than building the Walthers kit. I don't know if any of you have ever built the Walthers kit. You know the grain elevator that everybody has on their railroads, that you go over to everybody's house and say, oh, there's the Walthers elevator. Oh, look, there's the Walthers elevator. That kit trying to make the joints that are actually in the grain silos disappear is a nightmare. It's much easier actually just to go out and get some PVC, cut it, and then use Sintra for the top and bottom and put some detail parts on it. The nice thing about that is you can easily customize your grain elevator to fit anywhere. You can cut the PVC into halves on your table saw and use them as backdrops. As you see Steve follow down in the lower right-hand picture, you see how those are all just half tubes there. It's very inexpensive. The neat thing is you can get any size of silo, PVC is available in all kinds of, there you go. There's Jacob Dittmer right there with a piece of it. Yep. And it's awesome. And it's very, very easy to use. It's inexpensive. And frankly, it's kind of fun. And people will come over and go, oh, look, there's the Walthers grain elevator for the 400th time on the 400 layout. So anyway, grain elevators, as you guys know, because you're in the Midwest, except for Perry, but Perry's seen grain elevators. But, and I guess Bill Carr too. But anyway, they're every shape and size you can ever imagine. And this is a great way to capture a lot of that with your work. Simply, easily, affordably. There's a mill in the back there that's made out of a Keebry kit and then a bunch of different sizes of PVC. And again, easy to do, creates very unique buildings. Incidentally, for those of you that are double deck layout builders, owners, that structure right there is where my upper level starts to head down into the lower level. And that is the interface. That building is where the railroad disappears into the wall for the constant climb. I'm not a believer of helixes, so I ran that behind a wall that's accessible on the other side as a constant climb. And that's where that interchange takes place, is right there. So it's not too ugly of an interface. If you look at it, it may look a little odd, but it's very predictable and it works well. Backdrop buildings, structures. As all of you know, model railroad kits are really expensive. The reason that me and Cynthia didn't have a second child is because Walthers has all of our money that would have taken to raise that child. So at that point, we decided that probably there's got to be a better way to create some depth in your scene. And we did this just basically using a large printer and camera. I went out and shot all over the United States. Anytime I'd go to an NMRA convention or whatever, I would shoot buildings. I would shoot buildings broadside, bring them home, print them out on the 11x17 printer, cut them out and stick them to the backdrop. The other interesting thing you can do, if you'll notice right behind the Rock Island boxcar there, is a kit that I designed for Walthers. It's their Ashland Hotel. I just put that on a copy machine and copied the actual building and then used it on the backdrop. So if you look at the backdrop, that building looks like it extends onto the backdrop. which it does. So that way I could create the same design of building with roughly the same color and create a little more depth with that structure economically, because it's all about economics and speed. The other nice thing about backdrop buildings is you can add your own signage and things to it, which I do. I always make fun of all my friends and honor my friends and things like that with the backdrop buildings. This was the big yard that was oh my gosh, I can't even think of my own yard. Anyway, this was a large yard on the railroad, and most of the structures you see there are printouts or printouts on black foam core against the backdrop. So literally all of that was, I'm not going to say free, but was very, very economical. The other thing I really like about using photographs of actual buildings is it will challenge your actual model building, because real buildings are weathered, and they're weathered in a realistic way because your photographs are photographs of real buildings. So when you start sending your model buildings up against that, you realize, wow, I am not doing nearly enough weathering on my structures. So it then becomes a game of where you start processing how much you weather your existing 3D models to match the actual backdrop. And so you really do end up with much more realistic scenes, because your backdrop buildings force you to balance your actual 3D buildings so you have a realistic balance. Here's some of the photographs and signs and things you'll notice. You can stick all kinds of signs all over things, and you can go out on the internet and copy all kinds of signs. There's all kinds of, tons of building signs that you can then just add to your structures. You'll notice the Rock Island Freight House to the left there above the locomotives. You'll notice it is weathered in a manner that is similar to the backdrop buildings you'll see back behind. And I would have never, ever weathered a building that heavily prior to adopting those background buildings. Because again, if you pay attention to what you're doing as a model, you'll start looking at that and you'll start saying, oh my word, my structures aren't nearly where they ought to be weathering wise. So it's kind of an educational thing too, by just having, one of these things is not like the other. For those of you that grew up with Sesame Street, that experience, and that was a learning thing to me. In this scene, almost all the structures except for the depot and that bridge and the grain elevator over to the right are 3D printed, or excuse me, not 3D printed, but 2D printed structures. And again, it adds a really, really nice effect to your railroad. And I don't know if you guys realize it or not, but as you travel around and visit railroads, you get accustomed to seeing the status quo buildings. I mean, you can go to most people's layouts and you can name the buildings and who manufactures them. You just get that way, even though there's a lot of really nice downtown deco buildings now and a lot of other buildings, a lot of wood kits and things like that. You still, when you go to railroads, you can name the buildings. One of the nice things about the backdrop structures like this is the fact that it does put very unique structures on your railroad that are unidentifiable. So let's talk a little bit about landform. Obviously, as we build railroads, we are going to want to have some landform. We're going to want to have some uppity and some downity from our roadbed. And having been a locomotive engineer and a model railroader and sitting on trains day after day after day out on the main line, running from here to Wellington on the Santa Fe main line, I began to look at things. And one of the things I took a survey of was how much of your landform is below track level and how much of your landform is above track level. And oddly enough, about a third of your, and this is in Kansas, by the way, I will qualify that, because in the Rocky Mountains, I'm sure it's different. About a third of your landform is below your track level, and about 2/3 of it rises above. And so when I was building this railroad, that's one of the things I shot for was that. So we designed the benchwork accordingly, and then we filled the area in with stud shim. For those of you that aren't familiar with stud shim is a commercially produced waxed cardboard product that is used literally to shim studs. So if somebody is getting ready to do sheetrock work and they have a stud, 2x4 stud, that is out of plane, in other words, it's warped, you literally go and you staple the stud shim to the face of it, to bring it back into plane so you can do your sheetrock work. Well, you can buy this stuff at Home Depot or anywhere else relatively inexpensively because it's cardboard, pre-cut, and nicer than that is it's waxed, so you can, if you use plaster for your scenery, which I do, it doesn't just melt into nothing when you get it wet. We put it on with hot glue, cut it into any form. You can use all of it. It's rather economical. You can see it's not even very pretty the way we did it there. But that same scene there that you're looking at there, this was how it turned out. This is that exact scene once we had finished the scenery in it. And you'll also notice the backdrop off across the aisle of the farm scene back there. That all comes out of Daneman's book. And it's awesome how he teaches you to do that. So the stud shim, the nice thing about it is it's really, really versatile. Just like most scenery techniques, you can use it about any place. There's my wife down there. She had just done that, and now she's putting the plaster on. We use Woodland Scenics. Woodland Scenics makes it. We actually buy it from a veterinary wholesaler because that's what they use to put casts on animals. When animals break their legs, you can get it in the big rolls. You'll see if you look next to the water bottle back there, there's a great big roll of it there. It's super economical. We cut it into small pieces, lay it on, and then we just soak it down with the spray bottle. We're not dipping it in anything and trying to haul it over to the railroad. We literally put it in place and then spray it in place. So Dan Munson is up there in the upper area there. If you that upper photo, we've super glued ACC blocks to the wall and to the fascia that the stud shim would then be put across. And then the lower picture there, that's the same area after it had been scenic. So basically that turned into kind of a polyfoam ball hill, a little short tunnel there, and then the tunnel faces and things like that. Another nice thing about using polyfoam balls, and I won't go into this at great depth, is, but if you look at the upper picture where Dan's working, you'll notice I've already glued the rock castings into place. Down below there, there's nothing behind those polyfoam balls. They're literally just glued right to the wall. So your mind is reading that there's actual landform behind that when there really isn't. The polyfoam balls are just kind of shoved into place and glued into place. We glue them in place with Super 77 or Super 86 or whatever it is. Spray mount, just spray it in there and then just stick the polyfoam balls on it. And it's very fast. You can do a scenery in an area like this, probably 6 or 8 feet long, in an evening. You can have 6 or 8 feet of scenery done in an evening. And Jacob Dittmer and his dad, Mike, were really good at this. They became my scenery gurus for the polyfoam crew. Here Steve Hoddle is. It's working around a very difficult grid situation. This grid was about 15 feet long. And it required a lot of working around tight abutments and things like that. And you'll notice the stud shim is really good for that. You can bend it, glue it right into place with hot glue. That's what he's doing in the lower hand picture there. Steve is an engineer on the BNSF out of Kansas City East toward Port Madison. He's also been a friend of mine since we were in high school, and he's a great modeler. And he really is good at creating scenery because he spent his life out on the BNSF main line. So, but you can see doing that type of a scene with screen or other things would be very difficult to kind of tuck that screen in around all those abutments. But with the stud shim, it's very easy to do because the stud shim is so modular. You build it a little at a time. You kind of tend to weave it like you do with an apple or a cherry pie, like the top of that, where you're weaving the stud shim together, and works very well. And then you go back, if you look at the upper photograph, you go back with just little teeny squares of the Woodland Scenics or the veterinary plaster, and you spray it literally as you go, and it hardens and works beautifully as your base for your scenery. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is tie removal. This may seem really weird that you spend a lot of time, but one of the things that prototype railroads do is they have a natural hierarchy between their main lines and other than mainline trackage. In other words, they spend their time taking care of the mainline trackage, and the other than mainline trackage, they let go to a varying degree. One of the ways to model that is to go in, flip your flex track over, and remove ties. So you get an odd or extended tie pattern. And this was the Rock Island on the railroad. And of course, we all know how the Rock Island was, especially toward their end. They were running basically rails and mud. And in order to do this, I put the boys to work. They'd flip sections of track over, cut ties out, and then when we laid the trackage, it definitely created a hierarchy of the rail between the main lines and other than mainline trackage. And these are things that after you've built several railroads, you begin to realize, what can I have done to make this scene better? And mentally, you start thinking about, what can I do to offset this scene so it looks better than the last railroad? And one of the things is that our trackage, our model railroad trackage, is really too perfect a lot of the time. Prototype railroad, for anybody that's spent any time out there, even big class 1 railroads, they do not spend a lot of time on their less than mainline or industrial sidings. A lot of times it is junk. And so consequently, I wanted to create that hierarchy, and this is how we did it. So you notice in this scene, we're laying trackage here, and you can see over to the left, you can see how the ties have been cut out of that track work. It does take some time, but it is definitely worth it to do. While you're here, I'm also going to honor Jacob Dittmer again. You see that grade crossing in that lower right-hand photograph? Jacob is a professional wood tie road crossing creator. Jacob did
Uh-oh.
We'll give it a moment. Unless we lost Dave.
He's got a caution triangle in his square up here.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe Iowa has fallen off, or
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin has fallen off the network. Maybe it's snowing. I'll message him.
Well, while we're waiting, there is a question on the chat that says, when you spray the for the Masonite with the Fantastic, do you spray the front or the back side? Does anybody know? Or do you spray both to make it flexible?
I do not know. I'll have to ask Stephen.
I suspect both.
go into super elevation on the tangent before
There we go.
I hear rumors everything is frozen, so.
It's moving now.
Okay, well, here we go again.
Curve and spread that transition out into your super elevation. At least I would say 2 feet, and if you can do it 2.5 feet, it's better. So it's a gradual transition, especially if you're running passenger trains or piggyback stuff. The longer the car, the more the twist you're introducing, because literally that's what you're doing. You're twisting your rail from level into super elevation. Here you can see some super elevated track. It's amazing how awesome it is to watch your trains come out of super elevation on a curve like that one is, to hit the straightaway and then go right back into a curve with that super elevation. It really looks neat. That's one of the things we love about watching prototype trains, is that super elevation. And man, it really, really sings on your model railroad. And actually your trains run better as well, because your trains, the super elevation does affect your trains as long as you don't over elevate and you're pulling everything over. Also, if you've got steep grades on your railroad, I would highly suggest not super elevating sharp curves on grade, because that combines two forces that railroads hate, and that is curvature and super elevation, or excuse me, curvature, super elevation, and grade. Those three do not mix well. Here's another curve on the railroad. This is just prior to getting the signaling up, so you'll notice the signals aren't lit yet. But I will say, I think Ron Kofer was the engineer this day on the train, because he's extremely courteous. You'll notice that mainline train, when he comes up here to this meet, he's going to turn his headlights off for the meet. So he's a heck of a guy. So there he goes. Yeah. Okay, track painting. If any of you guys are in the process of building your railroads right now, one of the things that will make your flex track and or hand laid track look much better is painting your track. And it's not difficult to do. It can be done with basically spray paint, like my son Joel's doing there. We use a variety of colors. We would use blacks in the yard and places like that. And then they will naturally be knocked down from dark black when you do your ballasting. We'd also use a lot of tans and primer type colors, not the gray primer, but the zinc chromate type, which is kind of a reddish red oxide, and that works really well. A couple things I want to point out real quick. First of all, if you look at the upper photograph where Joel is painting the track, well, if you notice the backdrop, this comes out of Tom Danneman's book, and I would have never thought about this. You notice where the horizon line is? The horizon line is about 8 to 9 inches above where your railroad is. That is key to good backdrop work, and you'll see that if you read that book, because you're going to have buildings and a lot of scenery there, and that really helps create that backdrop because of the third of the area there that is in. But that's another conversation, another clinic we'll have if David ever invites me back, because we photographed that, talk about that too. Lower right-hand photo, you will see all the ties cut out there. You'll see the track work there and how it makes your track work definitely look like it's not so well maintained. Here you can see the effects of that weathering of the track. If you look in the lower left-hand photograph there at Munson, you'll notice the dark sides of the rail instead of the shiny, and it has a huge effect on your rail. It really, really does. It looks really good when you're done. Here's a yard scene, same thing there. Your rail looks much more scale and looks greasy and grimy, just like the prototype. Again, look at the backdrop buildings there. Those are all photographs printed out on just standard paper. Okay, track marking and wiring. A couple of things that we've learned along the way from doing track work. First thing is that if you use abrasive like abrasive, I forget what they're called, something zinc oxide maybe it is, or the cutoff of wheels, they shatter a lot. The other thing they also do is they tend to be fairly thick. So I started using these diamond bits that you can buy. They do a much thinner cut through your rail, so you don't have as wide of a gap, and they basically last forever because they're diamond bit. So I use that to cut my gaps. You'll notice the long drill bit. I used to use a standard drill bit, and about time you drill through the rail, you go clunk down on your rail head and you leave a divot in the top of your head, your rail head, because you can't take the pressure off your drill fast enough. So we discovered that if you go get the longer drill bits, you can actually catch yourself before you clunk down on your rail with your drill bit. So that was something that we discovered. We did a lot of hand laid track on the railroads, and that's another reason that we do a lot of hand painting of the rails or painting of the rail, because literally you have to paint it to make it look better because the hand laid track. You'll notice we go into a yard, mark it up for the wiring. You'll notice the red and the black. That's really helpful to go in and think about it before you start drilling your holes. Also, if you're a layout owner and you're going to be working with other people, they're going to be helping you build your railroad. That is a favor to them to go in and mark the rail where things are to be drilled and what color of wires to be there. That way they can actually go in and work on things rather than having to think about it, because a lot of times we think wrong, unfortunately, but there we go. Incidentally, just to let you guys know, I used fast track jigs to lay on my track work. Not that I'm advertising for them, but it was a wonderful experience. It was very enjoyable, and you can build very large turnouts that help your passenger trains and intermodal stuff look a lot better. In that left-hand photograph, you'll notice a couple of those turnouts there, are number 16s and 18s. They're great big turnouts, and they really improve the way your long cars operate. So this is another thing I want to talk to you about, I guess, how we did our Tortoise mounting, the turnout holes in the backer. In messing with Tortoises for a long time, several things really frustrated me. First of all, you'd lay a yard out and you'd lay out where everything was supposed to be. You'd go drill your little 1/4-inch Tortoise holes, put the track work back, and it never fit perfectly. You'd always have a Tortoise that was mislined or something, and you had issues with that. That was the first issue. The second issue was when you were under the railroad trying to stick your throw bar up into the turnout, you have a little teeny hole, and it's very frustrating to get those things lined up. So I started thinking about how on earth can I make a better method, a faster method for mounting tortoises that actually had some practical advantage. So what I discovered was, and if you look at all the turnouts here, behind where the throw rod is and points, there's actually a very thin sheet of plastic glued to the back of the ties on either side of the throw rod. This is what it looks like. You use very paper thin, you plyo bond on either side of your throw rod. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to drill a great big nasty hole under there that doesn't affect anything, because the plastic glued to the back of that acts as a pan which holds your ballast. So what happens is you drill a great big 3/4 inch hole underneath there, and by mounting the plastic to the back of the ties, it acts as a pan that holds your ballast. But the nice effect is, and this is the nicest effect, there's two things. First of all, if you happen to get anything underneath your throw rod, underneath your turnout, it doesn't matter because it just falls to the ground. If you look at the large photo of the turnout there, you can see the big hole underneath there, and nothing is going to bind that throw rod. You're not going to glue it shut. You're not going to get ballast in there because there's a large hole under there. The other really nice thing is, if you look in the upper right-hand photograph, if any of you have
Dave.
Can we get him to back it up? Can we get him to back it up when he gets it unfrozen?
I will ask him.
time you drill through the rail, you go clunk down on your rail head and you leave a divot in the top of your head, your rail head, because you can't take the pressure off your drill fast enough. So we discovered that if you go get the longer drill bits, you can actually catch yourself before you clunk down on your rail with your drill bit. So that was something that we discovered. We did a lot of hand laid track on the railroads, and that's another reason that we do a lot of hand painting of the rails or painting of the rail, because literally you have to paint it to make it look better because the hand laid track. You'll notice we go into a yard, mark it up for the wiring. You'll notice the red and the black. That's really helpful to go in and think about it before you start drilling your holes. Also, if you're a layout owner and you're going to be working with other people, they're going to be helping you build your railroad. That is the favor to them, to go in and mark the rail where things are to be drilled and what color of wires to be there. That way they can actually go in and work on things rather than having to think about it. Because a lot of times we think wrong, unfortunately, but you know, there we go. Incidentally, just to let you guys know, I used Fast Track jigs to lay on my track work. Not that I'm advertising for them, but it was a wonderful experience. It was very enjoyable, and you can build very large turnouts that help your passenger trains and intermodal stuff look a lot better. In that left-hand photograph, you'll notice a couple of those turnouts there, you know, are number 16s and 18s. They're great big turnouts, and they really improve the way your long cars operate. So this is another thing I want to talk to you about, I guess, how we did our Tortoise mounting, the turnout holes in the backer. In messing with tortoises for a long time, several things really frustrated me. First of all, you'd lay a yard out and you'd lay out where everything was supposed to be. You'd drill your little 1/4 inch tortoise holes, put the track work back, and it never fit perfectly. You'd always have a tortoise that was mislined or something, and you had issues with that. That was the first issue. The second issue was when you were under the railroad trying to stick your throw bar up into the turnout, you have a little teeny hole, and it's very frustrating to get those things lined up. So I started thinking about how on earth can I make a better method, a faster method for mounting tortoises. that actually had some practical advantage. So what I discovered was, and if you look at all the turnouts here, behind where the throw rod is and points, there's actually a very thin sheet of plastic glued to the back of the ties on either side of the throw rod. This is what it looks like. You use very paper thin, you plyo bond on either side of your throw rod. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to drill a great big nasty hole under there that doesn't affect anything, because the plastic glued to the back of that acts as a pan which holds your ballast. So what happens is you drill a great big 3/4 inch hole underneath there, and by mounting the plastic to the back of the ties, it acts as a pan that holds your ballast. But the nice effect is, and this is the nicest effect, there's two things. First of all, if you happen to get anything underneath your throw rod, underneath your turnout, it doesn't matter because it just falls to the ground. If you look at the large photo of the turnout there, you can see the big hole underneath there, and nothing is going to bind that throw rod. You're not going to glue it shut. You're not going to get ballast in there because there's a large hole under there. The other really nice thing is, if you look in the upper right-hand photograph, if any of you have poor or weak eyes like I do, you have a great big hole, and above that hole is a light source. Basically, that thin white styrene literally radiates the light down from above, so you can see to line your throw rod into your Tortoise, and it works. It just works beautifully. If things aren't perfectly aligned, you're fine because you've got a large hole. Then two other things, or a couple other things that make it look make your Tortoise mounting easier. The first thing is I use double-sided tape on my Tortoise, which you will see in that lower picture. I use chicken wire screen bits, which you see there, which are the ones that have the great big heads on them. And because I have a lot of hand-laid turnouts, I always upsize my throw rods. If you'll notice the two throw rods there, I always put a much larger throw rod size so I can actually bend the rail on my hand-laid turnouts. The other thing I will highly suggest that everybody does, even brand new Tortoises, I open them up, and inside there's a set of fingers that are used for contacts. I bend those fingers tighter against the PC in there for contact, especially if you're using signals, because I've had brand new Tortoises that I took underneath the railroad and mounted, and they didn't have good contact between the phosphor bronze contacts and the PC boards. So I've just gotten in the habit. I know it says right on them, you know, warning, warranty void, whatever. You know, I've never had one returned in warranty, but I always open them up and lubricate them and bend the electro contacts. So that's how I mount my Tortoises. Fast way, easy to do, good for your eyes, looks good to see your eyes, and removes the possibility of binding. All right, I know a couple of you are building signaling right now and putting signaling in, so I'm going to talk about this briefly. This is another nightmare task for old eyes that I absolutely hate. So I did everything I could to make the mounting and the wiring of my signaling easier. So what we did, I tried to do everything I could at the bench top, at the workbench. So we standardized the process. We did everything we could in the shop, prefabricated everything, made it easy to see and quick to mount. So what we came up with was going and cutting wood blocks and printing out on the printer basically a wiring code for different manufacturers. These happen to all be BLMA, which is the Atlas has that now, but you notice they're clearly marked. And then they're also clearly marked by the type of resistor, 330 or 1K, 1K. We went ahead and did some work with the signal colors and matched the resistance up to the signal colors. So then what happens, these things go out into the field. They get just literally glued underneath the railroad. And the nice thing is the little teeny magnet wire that is used on the signals, you can take a pair of tweezers, just grab that magnet wire, wrap it around the brass brads that are used for the to hold the resistors on each end. And that's the majority of your process is done at that point. And that saves a lot of work. Having things labeled, you'll notice down the lower left where we have signal bridges, we have dual head signals. If you look at those, they have an upper and a lower label on them, and then they have yellow, red, green. So all that's labeled. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's a 9-volt battery. That 9-volt battery has a resistor in it underneath that yellow heatsink. And then it has very high quality, extremely high quality alligator clips that are designed to grab magnet wire. If any of you guys have ever tried to deal with magnet wire, it's nice and it's fine, but it's a nightmare to hold. It's a nightmare to test your signals because it's hard to make contact. So to build yourself one of those up front, it will help you a lot being able to test your signal colors out on the railroad. And we'll take questions on this later if you guys are interested. Down in the lower right, that's a single location. It's BLM, but you notice it's a single location. It's not dual, where you got a dual head signal. So we made it for that as well. Okay, let's go over here. There's John DePaw in the lower right-hand corner. If you notice, in his hand is one of these. He's building one of these. Building one of these little things in the block. If you notice behind him, if you can see back there, there's a whole bunch of printouts on self-adhesive paper of these. And upper right-hand photograph, you'll notice like there's Overland Signal Bridge and there's BLMA. They have different resistor values. So we were able to do all that at the workbench. We took a poll. We went onto the railroad and took a poll of every signal that was going to be on the railroad, what type of signal it was going to be, and we went from there. Lower left-hand photograph, the signal bridge, you can see one of those in place. You can see it there with the upper and lower, and then the magnet wire coming down into location. I literally glued those where they were easiest to see, easiest to find. Then I would hide them with retaining walls. In some locations, we even hit them with shrubs. I mean, we hit them with, lightly glue our polyfoam balls over them so that they were easily accessible. So if something went wrong or somebody broke a signal off, bumped it, broke it off, you could easily get into it and repair it. So that made a huge deal. One other quick thing I'm going to mention is if you notice the picture of the signals in the middle, you notice the red signal is sitting on in a built-up signal box or a built-up fill with ties. I put my signaling and my scenery in together. And the reason is so you can do things like that, where you can actually have, and I tell you, anybody that's worked for the railroad, they'll tell you that all over the place, there are signals that are built into a fill like that with concrete or ties like that around it. And for model railroading, that's an excellent thing. So literally I would build that wood box out of ties, put ballast in it, let the ballast dry overnight, drill a hole down to the ballast, and then place the signal. And so it actually is sitting in a berm, in a berm there, so a signal berm. And with that, we were at the end of the presentation. Oh, my wife's over here. Thank you, honey. I appreciate it.
Well, very good.
So I hope I wasn't too long. I know that I was trying to be helpful to certain people that are in this position where they're building things.
Dave, there was one question that came up when they were working with the Masonite and the fantastic spray. Do you know if they spray front and back or both?
I'm not 1% sure, but I think he may answer that question. I've got probably a few minutes of questions if you want to keep going, if you're not getting too tired.
How much is you talking, 15 minutes or?
15 minutes maybe.
Okay, let's go and see.
Nothing wrong with that. Question. What size wire does Steve use for tortoise throw rods?
I would go buy what they had at the hobby shop. Literally, I will say that the longer your turnout is, the more force you need. So I kept a variety of that stuff on hand. And if I knew I was doing a 16 or an 18 turnout, I would use a very large size. I don't remember, to be honest with you, but I kept a lot of it there. I would also sharpen the ends of it. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but the larger your wire gets, you actually have to sharpen it. So I would put an abrasive cut-off bit in my Dremel, turn it on, and then just rotate like you're sharpening a pencil. So I would just sharpen the end of it so you can stick it up in the throw rod rather than have. But that was key to getting those turnouts to throw well.
Okay, sorry. Other questions?
Yes.
I've got one for you, Steve. Magnet wire.
Yes.
Have you ever run into a situation where you can't get an indication that the insulation or whatever is preventing what do you do to take some of that insulation back so you can get at the wire itself?
We actually got to the point where we were burning it off. We actually found that trying to strip it and everything was a nightmare. You'd end up kinking the wire and then it'd break. So we actually went to fire. So we ended up getting just some of those little teeny torches like they use to add brass detail parts, and we just burn it off with the fire. That worked really well.
Okay,
If you have a solder pot, that's what the industry uses. It would be just like tinning the end of the wire. That insulation is made to come off with heat.
I got a
If I
GoPro.
had a solder pot, I know what I would do. I can show you my knees and what I've done with soldering irons to my knees.
Yeah. You gotta be careful with them.
Dumping molten lead on my legs.
Ouch. It's something you do at a workbench. You don't do it under the railroad.
No.
The problem is once you get your signal in, I mean, you say that, but I tell you, once you get your signals in, it's amazing the challenges you'll have. Yeah, putting the signals in was by far the toughest part of the signaling. The physical signals themselves, that was the toughest challenge. I will say this too. Since a lot of signals, that magnet wire is inside a brass rod, and you may get to the point where you nick some of that wiring with the brass rod, and periodically you'll have signals that won't light because they're quote unquote shorting out. I discovered that if you use thinned Elmer's glue and a little teeny toothpick, you can repair a lot of that. You just find out where the wire was scratched off, dip your toothpick into that Elmer's glue, and then kind of feed it, and the capillary action will pull it down into your signal. We fixed a lot of them that way by dealing with the nicks on that magnet wire.
Cool. After watching the presentation on your layout, reminds me of the time you invited us down there. I think you said bring 12 guys. Of course, I brought 16, but we had a great time, great layout. And what really I noticed about it is we haven't traveled, obviously, with the COVID-19. How much all of us miss that. That's really kind of tough. But it was an outstanding railroad, and thank you for the invitation, my friend.
Well, you guys are a great group of guys. I've always liked the lacrosse guys, and I had a blast with you. And the neat thing about you guys is you're great operators too. I've had a lot of groups that come up and they just tear the daylights out of everything. I mean, you'll look around the railroad, there's broken signals and all kinds of, and I had none of that issue with you guys. So I can tell you guys are modelers and model builders because I had none of those issues.
Yeah. Good presentation, buddy.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot from everybody out there, just like you guys do. That's the neat thing about the hobby. It's a group effort in a lot of ways.
Yes, Perry?
I noticed that you had a GoPro in there. Is that what you use for your, is it like a number 7 that you use for going around the track?
In some cases, yeah. Yes, in some cases, that's how some of this was done.
Okay.
Right now, on another one of the layouts that we're working on, we've actually built a couple of camera cars with some really, really cheap streaming cameras. And we've been using that for remote operations. And
yeah, I just bought a GoPro 7 and got it hooked up to an Android tablet. And the problem is when you turn it so it's vertical, it's the same width, it turns the you have to turn your computer on the side because have you been able to figure out how you can rotate that 90 degrees?
There's a function in the setup software for GoPros that you can make that flip.
Okay.
I don't remember right offhand because it's been a while, but since I've had a GoPro on, for the Chinese ones, I can tell you that I believe it is a Command F or Command H or Command V, but I couldn't tell you about the GoPro.
Well, I'm still learning the GoPro. It's a very sophisticated little camera.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I was going to pop this and see if because there's a couple more questions I know. I think I remember hearing him talk about Fantastic, but I don't remember where.
Okay.
Anything else?
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one. How do you determine what your super elevation rail height is? Is it based on your radius or how much you're raising it?
Well, the prototype railroad uses track speed.
Right.
You know, obviously, the faster you run, the more super elevation you need. And the idea from an engineering standpoint is this, and I came out of the engineering department in the Santa Fe, so this is kind of some of the stuff I did, but if you're running too slow on super elevation, you wear your inner rail. Mm-hmm. If you're running too fast on track that is not correctly elevated, you wear out your outer rail. So the theory is, by super elevating, you equalize the wear on your inner and outer rail. Well, that's a great theory because obviously you run trains at all different speeds over the same track, but it does make a difference over years and over time. Model railroad wise, that's not important. So then it becomes an issue of what looks good and what is feasible to do. Well, obviously you can put any type of shim stock under there you want. So you can end up with just a little bit clear up to fairly serious elevation. So then you look at your prototype. You say, okay, I model XYZ railroad. What did they do? How did their mainline stuff look? And that becomes your goal then, is to mimic or to reproduce what your railroad had. If you're in a branch line railroad, you may not have but very, very little super elevation. If you're modeling the Pennsylvania, you know, or the Santa Fe or any of the big intermodal fast railroads, the UP, you probably ought to have some fairly serious super elevation. So it really is something that you're actually modeling, mimicking the prototype. It's not really doing that much for your performance.
Thank you.
And again, I would interject. I had a hill on my last railroad that I had to pull the super elevation out of. I had to go and redo an area of track because I put super elevation in on a curve on a grade, and we were frequently pulling trains over on that grade. If somebody would put too much force behind it, or you know, you had a heavy brass car toward the end of your train, you could string line your train and pull it over on that curve. And that is a downside of super elevation in model railroad is those forces. You know, if you have a car leaning already, it doesn't take much to go ahead and just knock it on over.
I've found that 15,000 is pretty good super elevation in most cases. Start out with 5,000s and 10,000s and 15,000s in the actual curve itself.
It's bizarre. I'm kind of an engineering kind of guy, but I also have this artistic side. And as much of my railroad is engineered, just as much of it is done on an artistic flavor, where you're not engineering something, you're doing it because of the way it looks, and it has that quote unquote right look to it. And so a lot of times when I'm asked questions like that, I never had a standard. You know, I looked at things, messed around with them in the evening, and said, "Yep."
Poor Steve froze again.
I guess it's cold there in Iowa or wherever it is.
Wisconsin. The electrons must be flowing slowly.
Well, I noticed it on mine. I popped out 3 or 4 times, and I finally had to take the background off that I had on from a previous Zoom meeting, and all of a sudden it's allowed me to stay in.
Yeah, the backgrounds
falls for cold.
Yeah, the backgrounds can affect things from time to time.
This on the same computer I'm sending out on, and that's a lot of workload. So it's pretty crazy. If you're not, I'm going to pop it forward just a little bit and see if I can find the fantastic.
And we can go into super elevation, cross a lot of that stuff in a little more depth so you guys can understand why we're a super elevation and do it modularly. That's one of the presentations that I want to do sometime too, is modeling urban scenery, because I had a, and so
when I came to your house some time ago, you were doing layouts and you were pressing the Stentra into the track to get the outline of whatever it is. I like your tape method a lot better.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It works far better. And it's so much easier, and it's exact because you are literally making an exact template of an odd shape with the tape. You know, and we had pieces of we had tape blobs we pulled off the railroad that were 4 feet long and 1.5 feet wide. A very complex shape, and then we take it out and because it's tape, we take it out and just stick it right on the Stentra and just cut it out, hauled in, and it just fit perfectly. It was like, wow, why didn't I discover this 20 years ago?
One quick question. I missed the thickness of plastic that was used under the ties for the turnouts by the throw bar.
As thin as you can get. I bought there's some stuff literally that's paper thin, and I put it on with Plyobond, and because the thinner the better, because obviously you don't want to be lifting your track structure at all.
Yeah.
And so, the only reason I use plastic instead of paper is because you're going to be ballasting, so you're going to have water up there.
So 10,000ths or something maybe.
Yeah. So you can see through it. The stuff I was using was so thin you can actually see through it. But again, I went to my scrap drawers and just dug out a bunch of stuff that's in the scrap drawers, and I think Mike Dittmer is doing the same thing. Mike, you're doing that in your room too, aren't you? Yeah. You're muted, but that's all right.
Yeah, yes, I'm sending Jacob to go find the package so we can get the side.
It's
Run,
fun.
go boy.
Mike lives about 1.5 blocks from me. Actually, if my arm is rested, I can hit the back of his house with an egg from my house. So
now that the leaves are off the trees, we can see our house.
Steve, I want to see you try that. I don't think you can get close.
No, I can't. I'm not boys. I wouldn't do that to Mike anyway. He's too neat of a guy.
I was going to say, but if he sent his son to run over to your house, Steve.
No, he sent his son to the railroad room.
But there is a trail between Steve's house and mine.
There actually is. There's a trail.
That's the thick stuff. Oh, it's. Go find the package so we'll find. He brought the thicker one, but it's literally paper thin, like Steve said.
But again, that's not important. What matters is find the absolute thinnest stock you can find, because it's not holding anything. Literally, most of it is sitting on your bench work. It's sitting on your homosode, most of it. And the little bit that's bridging over is 3/4 wide, and it's going to be Plyobonded. It's going to be glued onto the bottom of your tie structure. So there's no challenge structurally for it. It's holding 0.009 ounces worth of ballast. It literally has no challenge.
We found it. It is the 0.005 thick. Item number 9009.
Evergreen?
Evergreen.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're looking for a good source of styrene, there's a website called E Street Plastics. It's 10 to 15% of the price of evergreen. The same stuff. I buy it by 12 by 24 inch sheets for my cricket cutter all the time. I buy 100 sheets at a time. It's fantastic and cheap.
Yeah, in most cities, if you guys live in a city or near a city, most cities will have. We have little plastics here. I get 4x8 sheets of plastic or 4x8 sheets of Sintra. And it's dirt cheap, and they'll do a lot of cutting for you too. Like I'll buy a 4x8 sheet of plastic, and I'll have them cut it into 2x4s. So in other words, they do 3 cuts on it, so you can move it around. It's just much cheaper.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something about track?
Sure.
Track. Now, super elevation is easements. When you're laying flex track, of course, it's a lot easier to put an easement in to your curve or your roadbed as you follow it. And the reason that was driven home to me is when I was a young engineer in Aurora, we took over trackage from the Chicago and Aurora and Elgin Railway, which was an interurban railroad. And off the exit list, I caught some job in an SW1 that we switched around the depot and then went down on this track. And trying to get down on a hurry, you're probably going 15, 18 miles an hour. And the foreman said, Junior, if I were you, I'd slow down. Well, I didn't do that. There was no easement on this curve. It was easement on this curve. It was just like
Horse is force.
Mhm.
But yeah, anything else, guys? I'll sit here all night if you want. I don't care. I talked about a lot of stuff. I apologize for that, but again, these are questions that I get from people that come over all the time or came over, this type of thing.
I had a question on not using pink foam for hills. What's your thoughts on?
Oh, this was the.
We'll surrender.
Thank you, Dave.
On it, I thought it was there, and it's probably in there somewhere. I just may have zipped through it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, I was going to say thank you for being patient. We didn't know exactly how this was going to play.
Right.
And Perry can tell you we do this every Thursday night, and a lot of times it's more of a free-for-all exchange of ideas. But we tour layouts, we discuss techniques. I'm going to share with Perry, one of our presenters, Keith Robinson, is a master installer of Soundtrack's Tsunami sound decoders. And he did something for us last week. And then a week from now, he's going to do Decoder Pro programming. So I'm going to share his link with Perry to see if he can talk him into doing something for you guys. If you're interested.
Cool.
That sounds great. Appreciate that.
And we have several others that are coming in or we have that might be interesting too that I can share. Plus railroad tours. So.
Okay.
And I will put this plug in. If you are a subscriber to Railroad Model Craftsman, the cover story this month is one of our operating layouts.
Cool.
LS's Milwaukee Road. So.
Very good.
So there you go.
Okay. Well, again, I thank you very much. And I just wanted to let everybody know that Stephen Bartelski is going to do our virtual clinic next month. And it's going to be on GMRI panels and manifests. So if you're into the GMRI, it's a good idea to come to our meeting and learn about it. All right.
And we thank you all for attending this evening, and we will see you again next month.
Yep. Sounds good. Have a good evening, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Nice job, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'm trying to shut down. What's happening? Won't let me go.
Everybody's leaving.